Fairy tales are both stories of transformation and symbolic poetry. They are gifts from our ancestors, offering symbols and guidance for our human development. In this show, artist, philosopher, and teacher Sean Kramer will lead us into the imaginal realm of fairy tales, where we will find healing images and wise teachings for our own journey through this enchanted world. So welcome to Under Their Spell, meditating on fairy tales.
Welcome back, everyone, to Under Their Spell, meditating on fairy tales. I'm Sean Kramer, and in this fairy tale meditation, we will follow the journey of a young boy both into the forest and the underworld in a fairy tale called The Devil's Three Golden Hairs. To prepare ourselves for this meditation, we will begin with a visualization and opening ourselves to helpers and guides. So bring your attention to your body. Let your attention move through and fill your body like light filling up all the parts of your body, out through your arms, down through your legs. And within your body, let your awareness attach itself to your breathing. And as you breathe, with each breath, let your body and mind calm and relax, become more calm and relaxed, with a gentle, unstrained awareness. And in the imaginal world, picture a very large tree with deep, strong roots, a thick, powerful trunk, branches reaching out and upward, covered with beautiful living leaves. And watch that tree through time, through the seasons, as one set of leaves begins to sprout, grow, become full, large, and green, start to fade, wither, and fall off, blow away. And another generation of leaves sprouts, grows, withers, and falls. Through many, many years, many generations. And that tree is the tree of the human race. The leaves are the generations of men, women, and children, of all humans. Each generation, like one of the phases of leaves that grows and falls. And now see yourself as one of those leaves in one of those generations. You have your place on the tree, your process of growth within your generation. You go through the phases that all the leaves and the many generations before you have gone through. Birth, childhood, growth to adulthood, old age, death. Feel yourself as part of this greater process on this mysterious tree whose roots and sources go beyond anything we can understand. As we open ourselves to this story that past generations have handed down to us to help us understand this life process, we call upon you, holy angels, guides and helpers in this process of the universe and of humanity. Enlighten our minds, order our imaginations, and help us to understand these symbols. In past meditations, one thing we have seen is a common threefold pattern within many fairy tales and within their landscapes. So that a fairy tale will begin often at home, and then there'll be a journey into a forest or an underworld, and then a return home or to a new home. We saw that in Hansel and Gretel. Children from home go into the forest and have their forest conflict and resolution and then come out. In the last fairy tale we looked at, Mother Hala, the girl begins at home and then journeys to the underworld and then returns back home, having been changed, transformed, deepened through that experience in the forest or the underworld. In the story Mother Hala, we saw that the landscape was the home and then the well through which the girl traveled to the underworld, and then the underworld, and the home represented her personal experience, her personal conscious and unconscious memories, family life. The well was the birth experience, the perinatal realm, the experience of birth in the womb, and the underground was what could be called the transpersonal or archetypal level of her being. The being she shared with the human species and with all of nature. In the fairy tale that we will look at today, we will also see this pattern, but interestingly, it will be doubled. The fairy tale we will look at today is a little bit longer one, and it has two parts to this character, this boy's journey. In the first part, he goes from home and into the forest and then to his new home in the castle. But the fairy tale doesn't start there. He has to make another journey from the castle to the underworld and back again. So here we have that pattern, but in both forms, into the forest and into the underworld. And in many of the previous tales we looked at, the subject was more about at least more on the evident surface, more about the growth process of young girls, and often in relation to the mother archetype and complex, such as in Mother Hala, the Frog Prince, the Goose Girl. So in this tale, though we have that similar pattern, we have instead the story of a young boy and his conflicts and resolutions around the father or father figures. So in the last fairy tale we looked at, Mother Hala, the story told about a girl who in the above ground world had conflicts with her mother. And then she went through a watery well into the underworld to spend time with an archetypal mother figure. In this fairy tale, The Devil's Golden Hairs, we will see that in the above ground world there's a boy who has conflicts with his father or father figures, king in this case. And he goes to the underworld not through a watery well, but by crossing a river, where he must spend a night with an archetypal male father figure. In Mother Hala, the archetypal mother figure, Mother Hala, the old woman with the large teeth who caused the changes of seasons in the above world, was an image of nature. Nature with a capital N, kind of the divine, mysterious nature, the source of these changes in the world. And the girl received healing by experiencing the deeper connections of her own female nature and her call to be a mother with the various sources and processes of this mysterious divine nature of the universe. So let us travel with this boy on his journey through life and into the underworld. And after having seen the whole tale and its imagery, we can then come back and meditate on the symbolism of who the boy meets in his underworld journey, what he experiences there, and how that is a fitting solution to his above ground problems. So, as I said, in this story, there are two parts. So let's begin with part one. The part one is the story around a forest, and part two about the journey to the underworld. So the landscape in part one is a typical home, and in the forest, and then the new home, in this case a castle, and the movement of this part of the story is towards getting a wife. The boy grows up and ends up married with a wife in the castle. In some fairy tales, like the Goose Girl, end there. The Goose Girl went on her journey and ended up married in a castle. But many fairy tales don't end there, and they go further, or some start there. So the stereotype of the fairy tale ending as get married and then just live happily ever after is exactly that, a stereotype and a false one. The fairy tales tell us about there being further journeys in more dark forests and underworlds to pass through after marriage and within marriage itself, as this story is an example of. So the story begins all the way back at the birth of this young boy. And as he's born, he has some signs and a prophecy given. He's born with a caul, which is a piece of the amniotic sac stuck to him as a baby. And a prediction is made that in his 14th year, he will have the king's daughter, the king of the land. He will have the king's daughter for his wife. And soon after his birth, the king comes into the village, but he is disguised. He goes around the kingdom disguised, not revealing he's the king, looking at what's going on in his kingdom. So while he's there, they tell him about this boy who was born and is prophesied to marry the king's daughter. The king does not want this to happen. And so he arranges with the parents to buy the child. He offers them gold and says that he will take care of the child. And the parents agree. They take the gold and sell the child to the king. So the king, in this way, becomes the father of the child. He, like the adopted father. So he takes the child, he rides away, puts the little baby in a box, and comes to some water and throws the box into the water. And thinks, there, now I have freed myself of this unwanted suitor of my daughter. But the box floats down the river and is picked up by a worker at a mill who brings it to the miller, and the miller and the wife are very happy that they've always wanted a child, and they take it in and raise it. Now, 14 years later, the king is traveling around his kingdom, and he goes to the mill and he asks the miller about their boy, if it's their son, and they say no, he 14 years ago floated down the river in the box. So the king knows that the boy survived. So he gives them a letter and asks if the young man could take this letter to the queen, and he will pay them in gold for this service. And he writes in the letter that as soon as this boy shows up with this letter, he shall be killed and buried, and make sure it's done before I return. He seals the letter and sends out the boy with the letter. So the boy is now on a journey carrying his own death sentence, sealed up unconsciously with him. He becomes lost in a large forest, and at night he sees a little light and he follows it. He gets to a cottage. He opens the door to the cottage and sees an old woman sitting alone by a fire. He goes inside, and when she sees the boy, she says to him, "From where do you come, and where are you going?" The boy says that he comes from the mill and he's going to the queen, taking her a letter. But I'm lost and I want to stay here overnight. And the woman says, this is a house of thieves. There's a group of young men who are robbers and thieves and murderers, and when they get back, they will rob and murder you. The boy says very nonchalantly, well, that's fine, I'm not afraid, I'm just tired and I want to go to sleep. And he lays down and goes to sleep. So here we have a situation in this land of some juveniles, boys, young boys, there's a mother figure, they have no father, and they are robbers and thieves. And notice what will be a pattern in this story. This young boy gets in situations with a helpful female mothering figures and threatening male figures. And in this situation, he is in many ways unconscious. He's unconscious of the contents of the letter, and he's literally unconscious and goes to sleep. And while he's sleeping, the robbers come back in the night. So almost we could think of this as his dream world, his unconscious, things he's unconscious of. And they open up the letter and read it. And they see that it says that as soon as he arrives in the castle, should be put to death. So they feel pity for him. And they rewrite the letter to say, as soon as this boy arrives, let him be married at once to the king's daughter. And they reseal it and give him the letter, and he leaves on his way. So, if this night and this letter are images of what the boy is unconscious of, what are some of the things he's unconscious of? He's unconscious of the contents of the letter, of the deep conflict that exists between him and the king, and also of his marriage, even of his desire for marriage. It's all unconscious. So his aggression and violence and his eroticism in their sources, are unconscious to him. Also the very situation, his reliance on a mother figure and his feeling surrounded by threatening male figures are symbolized in the nighttime of his unconscious. So when the boy arrives at the kingdom, the queen reads it, the king is not there, and she does as it says. She marries him, makes a wedding feast, marries him to the king's daughter, and they live for a period contentedly together. So there's the first part of the story. In the second part, the story map, the landscape, begins from the castle and follows the boy journeying through the land, some things he sees in the kingdom, to the underworld, where he spends a night and then he returns back. Now, the boy is already married, but things aren't all well and settled. there's still a problem, so let's see what the problem is. So when the king returns, he sees what has happened, that the boy is now married to his daughter, and he says to the boy, everything is not going to go so easily for you as it has. If you want to keep my daughter, you must go get for me from hell 3 golden hairs from the head of the devil. And the king, hoping to be rid of him, but the boy answers, again very carelessly as he usually does, I'm not afraid of the devil. Sure, I'll go get those golden hairs. And he begins on his journey. So interestingly, his problem now is to keep his wife. He got married easily. So he entered a relationship fairly unconsciously, carelessly, with little awareness of his own desires and motivations. But if he wants to maintain the relationship, there are some things he needs, some things he's lacking, which are symbolized by 3 golden hairs from the head of the devil in hell. So this fairy tale is about the problem of someone who gets married very easily, but there are obstacles and problems toward this person remaining in marriage and going deeper into the relationship. His tendency would be to perhaps go from one relationship to another, but because he has difficulty with the consequent phases of remaining and going deeper in a relationship. So the story is about a carefree, lucky kind of boy who has many inner unconscious conflicts and fears, but on the surface feels he knows things and he's not afraid of anything. But inside he has very conflicted images and relations, particularly to male figures and cultural authorities, symbolized by the king. And in that, his response to that is to be soothed and protected by female mother figures, the woman in the forest, the queen who marries him to the daughter. But while the king is in opposition. We might think of him as kind of a naive, kind of nature boy who's in conflict with the traditions of his culture and civilization. He's unconscious of his inner conflicts and obstacles to deeper, lasting relationships. So he's the kind of young man who could remain a man who easily enters a relationship with females, yet has great difficulty with steps beyond that. And maybe the king knows that about him and sets him on his journey to growth. and he must get something from this figure in the underworld referred to as the devil, the hairs from the head of the devil. So there's something he needs from the threatening masculine if he's going to have a right relationship with the kingdom and with the feminine. So let us see. Let's continue his journey and see what he finds there. So on his journey, he follows a road and he comes to a town. And when he gets to the gates, the men at the gates ask him two things. What is your trade, your profession, and what do you know? Two things that someone gets from their culture and civilization. A craft, a skill, and knowledge and wisdom. And in fact, he doesn't seem to have either. And his only answer is he says, I know everything, like a naive young person. So they say, well, then can you tell us why it is that the fountain in our town, which once flowed with wine, has become dry and no longer even flows with water? The boy says, I'll tell you that, but on my way back. He doesn't know it. He does not have yet knowledge or a trade. So he continues his journey and comes to a second town. And the man at the gate asks him again, what is your trade and what do you know? He only answers, I know everything. So they say, well then, can you tell us why the tree in our town that once gave us golden apples does not even put forth leaves now? It's withered. And the boy says, you will know that, wait till I come back from my trip. So these are things that are important for him to know. They also are telling us the state of the kingdom, that fountains are dry and trees are withered. Then, thirdly, he comes to a great wide river. And the ferryman there asks him the same two questions. What is your trade? What do you know? He says again, like a naive young man, I know everything. So the ferryman says, well then, you can tell me, why is it that I must be always rowing backwards and forwards and am never set free? The boy says, wait till I come back. So not only are things in this realm dried up, withered, but there's kind of a sterile repetition in activity, no innovation. So the boy then crosses the river and comes to the entrance of hell. And when he goes inside, he finds that there's an old woman, the devil's grandmother, sitting in a large chair. Notice how this is almost the same thing he sees when he goes into the cottage in the forest, an old woman sitting. And the devil, who is the grandson of this old woman, is not there. She says to the boy, "What do you want?" And the boy says, "I want 3 golden hairs from the devil's head, or else I will not be able to keep my wife." The woman says, "That is a very great thing to ask for. If the devil finds you, it will cost your life. But I pity you. Let me help you." And she turns him into an ant and says, "Climb into the folds of my dress and you will be safe there." So in this story, the hell and the devil, the hell is, I think it's the underworld and the land of the dead, of the ancestors. It's a more mythological world. I think it would be not right to think of it as the like Christian Lucifer, Satan, but the devil as an ancient being in the underworld who is over the realm of the ancestors. In an ancient Hittite myth, the original ruler god is overthrown and another one takes over, and the first ruler god then goes and dwells in the underworld. And this is in some ancient being like a previous king, maybe, who's now forgotten and in the underworld with the dead. And this ancient being is descended from an even more ancient mother being, grandmother, maybe Mother Hala herself. And when he gets there, he is turned into an ant and creeps into the folds of the great mother's dress. This is a image of possible kind of regression, that this boy who feels threatened by the masculine, by maybe even his own culture and civilization, which he is destined to enter into, become part of. And when he feels threatened, he regresses to the mother figure. And this happens to young people, that when they have too many negative images of their elders and their culture, they regress. This impedes their growth to adulthood, meaning to be contributing members of the civilization. They regress to a mother figure. In other words, they look to the civilization not as something to become part of and contribute to, but something that is supposed to take care of them. And they blame the civilization if they're not cared for. So he's there in the underworld as an ant in the folds of the mother's dress. And so we see the problem. He's gone in a way into his own unconscious, and we see some of what is his problem, that he must somehow heal and rid himself of his view and image of the father and the father figure, the king, as a threat, as something that wants to impede and devour him. He must change that image and see it as a source of growth, of golden hair for him, and some other things which we'll see, what he must get. So this boy, in his inner world is full of threatening males and mothering, protective females. He unconsciously is living in fear of older males and relying on a protective mother image. And this is going to cause him problems with his relationship, with his marriage. So the boy then says, there are also 3 things that I want to know, he tells the grandmother. Why a fountain which once flowed with wine has become dry, why a tree which bore golden apples does not even put forth leaves, and why a ferryman must be always just going back and forth and never can be free. So the boy also needs answers to problems whose sources are beneath the surface, underground problems. And he must seek those answers below the surface in the underworld from a being who knows about underground things, the quote devil. And the grandmother says those are difficult questions, but be silent and pay attention to what the devil says when I pull out the 3 golden hairs. And in the evening, when night is coming on, the devil returns. So in the forest, the boy slept through the night. He was not aware, he remained unconscious, but the grandmother tells him now he must pay attention, stay awake, so he can hear what the devil says during the night. And this is a change, this is his growth, that he must remain awake during the night, in the underworld, to see what has so far remained unconscious to him. That will be a healing and will enable him to keep his wife. So when the devil comes back, he eats and drinks, and lays down on the grandmother's lap and goes to sleep. So the old woman pulls out one of his golden hairs, and the devil wakes up and cries, "What are you doing?" And she says, "I had a bad dream, and that's why I pulled out one of your hairs." The devil says, "What did you dream?" The old woman says that I dreamed of a fountain from which wine once flowed, and it's now dried up, not even water flows. What is the cause of that? The devil says, there's a toad sitting under a stone in the well. If the toad was killed, the wine would flow again. He goes to sleep again. The old woman pulls out another hair. The devil wakes up. "What are you doing?" And she says, "I had a dream." So the devil says, "What did you dream?" And she says, "I dreamt that in a certain village in a kingdom there was an apple tree that once bore golden apples, but now it's withered and doesn't even bear leaves. What is the cause of that?" And the devil says, "A mouse is gnawing at the roots. If the people would kill the mouse, they would have the apples again. But if it keeps gnawing, the tree will completely wither and die. So the questions are about the causes, the underlying causes of things that are happening in the kingdom. And these are things that this underground being, this ancient underground man, knows about and can explain. He knows things below the surface. He knows causes and reasons of things. This is something that the boy needs. He goes to sleep a third time, and the old woman pulls out a third golden hair. The devil again jumps up, and she says, I had a bad dream. Again. So what was the dream, he asks. She says, I dreamt there was a ferryman who had always to go from one side to the other, back and forth, and could never be released. What is the underlying cause of this? And the devil says, if he wants to be free, when anyone comes and wants to go across, he must put the oar in that person's hand, and then that person will have to ferry back and forth, and the oarsman will be free. Then she let the devil sleep. And when the devil leaves in the morning, the woman gives the boy the 3 golden hairs and asks him if he heard the answers. And the boy says, yes, I've heard. So he leaves and returns on his way. And he gives the answers in turn. First to the ferryman, that the ferryman, if he wants to be freed, must give the oar into someone else's hand. And then he tells the 2 towns that the one with the tree must kill the mouse at its roots, gnawing its roots, and the one with the dry well must kill the toad that is beneath the stone at the bottom of the well. Each of the towns give the boy a large amount of gold to take back. He returns to the kingdom and gives the king the 3 golden hairs. And when the king sees all the other gold that the boy has gotten, he asks him about it. And the boy says, there's a river, and if you go across the river, the gold is like sand there. So the king goes off to get gold for himself. And when he gets to the river, he gets on the boat of the ferryman, and the ferryman hands him the oar and leaps and runs away. And the king is stuck with the oar in his hands that he can't let go of, rowing back and forth. So there is our tale. And what is the overall theme and the solution that is found in the 3 golden hairs? In this story, the obvious thing is that in this kingdom, the life is not flowing. Wells are dried up, trees are withered, actions are fixed, repetitive, stuck. And the reason for this is that there are problems between the young and the old. The older generation, represented by the king, especially the older males, instead of helping the young, apprenticing them, passing on knowledge and trades, they are in opposition to the young. They're using their positions for their own good and not for the common good. So the flow of life and the passing on of culture through the generations is blocked in this world. And the young people, represented by this young boy, are unaware of the deeper sources of things and of their own culture. They have a negative view of their culture, of their civilization, and of the masculine. Very much, I think, like the problem with our culture that has this negative view of the culture. Just the very term patriarchy and patriarchal has acquired a primarily negative connotation. But in this story, there are things that they need from their culture, from history, the past, and the patriarchy. Golden hairs. Gold being a symbol of the transformed, realized human nature. Human nature in which consciousness and matter are perfected, like light and matter and gold. And so what is the symbolic solution in this story? It's the devil and what the devil has. The devil he's underground, and he knows about underground things, about causes of things, about things that are unconscious to the young and the old in this culture and civilization. And he's an ancient being who is connected with the Great Mother, nature. And this is one problem in the passing on of culture and civilization, that sometimes just the superficial things are passed on, but not the deeper sources of the culture, the very inner human light and wisdom and evolving tendencies that gave rise to the culture. When people just get certain results, things that have been built up over a long time of the culture, but not the sources, they can become alienated and really can't appreciate the culture. And this underground male is symbolic of the very deep sources of human culture that are in deep connection with nature. That is a basic judgment about cultures and civilization, their connection with nature or disconnection. So this figure, referred to as the devil because he's been cast out and forgotten by this culture, is there with the Great Mother. And the story ends with the image of the king who was opposing the young man in the succession of generations, stuck on a river with an oar. And that's fitting. For one reason, it takes us back to the beginning where he threw the boy in a river and he's now stuck on a river. But even more significantly, this is an image of his own inner world, that he is someone who will not let go of the oars of his kingdom. He's an over-controlling authority in his kingdom and culture. He was snooping around the kingdom, finding out what was going on, trying to oppose the next generation. So that's the image for his very inner nature. His punishment is just to be the kind of person he is, someone who is so over-controlling, he will not let go of the oar, and so he is stuck and stagnated. So, Salamon, are there any comments or questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
We didn't have any questions, but we did have a comment. And Salima said that this is one of her very, very favorite Grimm tales, and that she used to read it over and over. Her other favorites are the 12 Brothers, The Girl Without Hands, and The Robber Bridegroom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's the comment that we have, and this I really enjoyed this fairy tale. It's a very interesting one and seems very adventurous, and kind of like some of the other ones. It didn't turn out, horrible for the boy. he kind of came out with a bunch of gold and a princess.
Yes. Yeah, and that's common to fairy tales, that they have a hopefulness to them. Even though they will include maybe some frightening journey in the middle, or frightening figures, or being lost in a forest, but they don't leave a person there. They offer some solution. And I think that's part of the intention of the fairy tale genre, that they're not just expressions of the troubles and difficulties of growing up, but they do that, but they also are meant to offer some wise teachings about how to move through those difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
So they symbolize both those things. So I like, in looking at fairy tales, to look at what are the solutions that they are trying to convey to people. And not always, but very often, to young people in the difficulties of growing up, but in broadly to humans going through the changes of the life process, the human life process. The fairy tales are trying to give us symbols of the process. That itself is helpful, and symbols that help us to not regress or be stuck, but to grow through our life process.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, yeah. And this was a good one, and I think, a lot of people, when they come onto Earth and they see how this world works, it is a little bit difficult for them. So I think that this was a great story.
Yes, right. That's a common experience, that culture gives us things, but it also gives us problems. In civilization, we have many benefits, but it's also a burden, and there are negative aspects to it, and to somehow not be discouraged by that, but work through, look for the deeper sources of goodness and wisdom that the past humans have given us, and try to take that to contribute something ourselves.
Great. Well, I definitely appreciate it.
You're welcome. Shall we finish with a brief meditation?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So come into our bodies and use our breath to enter our bodies, to to observe what we are feeling right now. And there's a practice that in many cultures, and it's very strong among the Tibetans, they call it Guru Yoga. And we can do that now. It means that we remember our ancestors in general and particular ones whose teachings may have helped us in a very particular way. That we have gotten something from some wise teacher of the past for whom we're grateful. Could be Jesus or the Buddha, Confucius, Plato, or other just in our family, ancestors, grandparents, teachers. And feel them present with you and feel the gratitude that you have to them, how they have benefited you in your life, how much better your life is because of this contribution of these humans who have gone before. Feel them present and ask their continued blessing, light, guidance in your life.